by the court as well. So it was very controlled by that. At that time in Japan, the primary forms of Buddhism were Tendai and Shingon, although right before, maybe just a couple of years before Dogen was born, Eihei brought Rinzai Japan from China to, brought Rinzai Zen from China to Japan. And so it was really in its kind of nascent period, but still part of Buddhism in Japan. Dogen was the son of aristocratic parents. Both his mother and father were their families were very highly placed and connected to the imperial court. He was one of 11 children, although he himself was illegitimate, so was unable to inherit. But he was raised to enter the aristocracy. And his father was highly regarded in literary circles. And he was trained he spoke both Japanese and Chinese. He was well-versed in the classics of both those cultures. And he was trained in the manners and skills necessary to be an aristocrat and to work within the government, and actually was intended to do that. But he himself chose instead to become a monastic. And he did that for a couple of reasons. One is when he was 2 years old, his father died, so very early. And then just a few years later, 5 years later, when he was 7 years old, his mother died. And his mother, when she was dying, asked him to please investigate the matter of suffering and the release from suffering that Buddhism offers. And she asked him to do that. And then when he was at her funeral, and he's just a 7-year-old boy, he was watching the smoke from the incense rise. And I after I read this, I was watching some smoke from the incense, and I thought how beautiful it is. You know, it starts from this one little stalk, and it kind of spreads out, and it's very beautiful. And he supposedly, when he was watching that, had this very deep sense of the impermanence of life. And of course, partly because of his loss of his parents as well. So when he was 13 years old, he decided to enter the Tendai sect, and he was ordained as a priest in the Tendai sect. And he stayed in the Tendai sect for a period of time, but he was dissatisfied with the teachings that he was getting. So he actually moved to Kaninji, which was the Rinzai temple at that time, and studied with Eihei for a period of time. And he was still unsatisfied. And he developed a question that he carried through all of his training. And that question was, if all are endowed with Buddha nature, why is it necessary to seek for enlightenment? Why, if we already have this, why do we have to practice? That was his question. And he asked teachers that, and nobody could answer it for him. So he decides to go to China. And he, of course, was familiar with the high point of Zen or Chan Buddhism in China was during the Tang Dynasty. And this, of course, was after the Tang Dynasty. But he went there, and it was a period in China where actually a lot of people felt like Buddhism was in decline. And he went there, and he went to various monasteries, from monastery to monastery, talking to teachers, meeting various monks, and asking this question. And he was still completely, after he'd been there for a while, he was completely unsatisfied, had decided that he was going to leave, was on his way back. He was going to stop and visit a friend first, was on his way back to the ship. And he met a monk who said, don't leave. Before you go meet this guy named Ryujin. And Ryujing, I'm sorry. And so he went to meet Ryujing, and immediately he says to this was a meeting between a man and a man. Well, as a woman, I think, well, okay, that's good. But he meant, this was like a complete meeting. And so when he went into Ryujing's monastery, Ryujing was an old man at that time. But the monastic schedule is very rigorous. Early in the morning, 3 in the morning or something, starting sitting, lots of sitting during the day and sitting till fairly late at night. And Ryujing sat right along with them and was probably the more rigorous of all the monks there. And so Dogen stayed with him for about 2 years. And at one morning, in the morning sitting, the monk next to him was falling asleep. And Ryujing comes up behind him and yells, "In Zazen, it is imperative to cast off body and mind. How dare you indulge in sleeping?" And I don't know what happened to that monk, but Dogen supposedly was enlightened. Dogen suddenly got it. I always wonder what happened to that other guy. He's probably still sleeping, trying to stay awake. Like, oh, wait, I don't get it. Something happened, but it didn't happen for me. But anyway, so he actually goes into Ryujing's rooms and offers incense. And when Ryujing comes in, he asks him what's going on. And Dogen says, "Body and mind cast off." And Ryujing bows and recognizes his enlightenment. So he gives them, he gives them some robes. He gives them papers that say that he's reached enlightenment, that he's had transmission, and he gives them a picture of himself. And Dogen goes back to Japan. So when he goes back to Japan, he first actually moves into the Rinzai temple. But over the period of about 20 years, he builds up a very strong following. And he, in some way, I think, they say he never intended to develop a new school of Buddhism or anything like that. But he was very focused on spreading what he thought was the true Dharma, the true teaching that he had received in China and that he felt was not present in Japan. So he really had this kind of mission that he really wanted to spread that. I think one of the incredible things for me to find out about him was that when he opened his own monastic school, he made it open to everyone. And he said it was open to people regardless of their gender, their status, their intelligence, their profession. And he also abolished the separation between lay people and monastics. And he had this ambition that it should be just as accessible to someone who is a lay person as it should be to someone who could be a monk. And this is very important because, as I say, the monasteries were so controlled by the aristocracy, and that it was very hard to make any kind of headway within a monastery if you were not from an aristocracy or well-educated or that sort of thing. And so he accepted all kinds of different people into his monastery. I wanted to read a couple quotes from him that speak to this. The first one is, "The understanding of Dharma, as the ancestors taught, does not depend on differences in sex and rank." And of course, as a woman, and of course, women are very new, relatively new in Buddhism. It's really nice for me to hear that way back then, one of our major teachers really recognized this separation. And, there are stories of him accepting women. There was one story of him accepting a prostitute as one of his teachers. One of his students. And so these kinds of ideas, I think, are very important. The other one, that one was from a segment of the Shobogenzo called Mitsugo. And this next one is from Bendawa. Enlightenment, depends solely on whether you have a sincere desire to seek it, not upon whether you live in a monastery or the secular world. And then the second part, when I first read it, I just love this part. So I've had it memorized and been quoting it for a month or so because it impacted me. Those who regard mundane life as an obstacle to the Buddha Dharma know only that there is no Buddha Dharma in the mundane life. They do not yet know that there is no mundane life in the Buddha Dharma. And I love that. So I try to remind myself of that. And I think it's wonderful. Dogen, one of the reasons why Dogen is so influential is that we have extensive writings from him. And I think it's hard, you know, I don't think I'd really kind of put this together, but that's very unusual for us to have extensive writings from a teacher, a Buddhist teacher. That most of what we have are stories told about the teachers or lectures that they gave written down by someone else, and sometimes long after they gave them. So they're edited. And, you know, James mentioned Suzuki Roshi. Suzuki Roshi, when he gave lectures, he couldn't speak English very well. And so his lectures really don't resemble what's in, say, Zen Mind Beginner's Mind that much. I mean, the content's probably pretty close, but it's really highly edited. It's his students who listened to those over and over again and kind of came to a consensus about how to put that together. So we're not really hearing Suzuki Roshi's words when we read that. But with Dogen, Dogen was an incredible writer, and he wrote these himself. I mean, the only, you know, if we read the writings, if we read what Buddha said, you know, those were written down long after he died. And then there's translation, and translation again from one language to another language, then from that language to another language. We have all these filters. And so with Dogen, we still have that, the translation from Japanese. He wrote in both Japanese and Chinese. And so we still have that sense of translation. And so one of the things when you read Dogen, if you read different people's translations, you sometimes get a very different kind of feeling from it. But I think this chance to have this kind of direct teaching is really wonderful for us. And he most of his writings are gathered together in what's called the Shobogenzo, which is the treasury of the true Dharma Eye. And there are all kinds of versions of it. There's one version that only has 12 chapters, and there's another version that has 30 something, and there's one that has 70 something, and then there's one that has 96 or 95 or something like that. So there's all these different kind of editions of it. But he had hoped in his lifetime to be able to get 100 chapters or 100 fascicles written, and I think he made 95 or 96, something like that. When I thought about giving this talk, first what I wanted to do is like talk about all the parts that I don't know that much about Dogen, but there are certain ones I really like. And so I thought, I'll just talk about all of it. And then I realized that's not going to work. So I decided to really focus on maybe one. And the one that I that I decided to choose is the Genjo Koan, which I'm sure a lot of you know that. Genjo, Gen means that which appears just as it is, and Jo means complete, full, or all-inclusive. So Genjo means total manifestation in every moment of things just as they are. And Koan, of course, means some kind of paradox or spiritual puzzle. So one translation of Genjo Koan that I like based on this is the paradox of the manifestation just as it is of each and everything totally and completely. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's kind of also very beautiful. Genjo Koan is one of the first fascicles of Dogen that I really looked at, and there are many parts of it that I just consider incredibly beautiful and have been very impactful for me in my life. But I wanted to start, I'm not going to try to cover the whole thing, just a little bit of it, but I want to start at the very end. And the reason I want to start at the very end is because Dogen finishes the Genjo Koan with a koan, a story of another teacher, another Zen master from China. And that story goes like this. Zen master Bao Che was fanning himself. A monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of wind is permanent, and there is no place it does not reach. Why then do you fan yourself?" And Bao Che answers, Although you understand that the nature of the wind is permanent, you do not understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere. So the monk comes back immediately. What is the meaning of it reaching everywhere? And Baoshi just fanned himself. Well, you know, we love these koans because they kind of leave us hanging, you know, they're like, okay. But, you know, this Genjo koan, this koan is Dogen's question. You know, why, if we're already enlightened, why, if we're already Buddha nature, why do we have to practice? Why do we have to do something to realize that or become that? That's the same thing the student is asking this teacher. Why, if the wind reaches everywhere, why do you have to fan yourself? You know, well, the teacher doesn't really answer. He just keeps fanning, you know, keeps practicing. Okay, it's like the teacher just keeps sitting, you know, if you ask him why you have to do that. So the reason why I start at the end is because Genjo koan is Dogen's answer to his own question. It really, you know, he goes through it in kind of a step-by-step fashion to answer that question. So let me find my place here. I want to just start out by, I'm just going to read the first 5 sections of it. I think there's 14 sections or something like that, but I think that would be way too much for us. So I'm just going to read the first 5 sections. And I want to read them all at once, just because for me, one of the things that's so great about Dogen is this kind of poetic flow. And I often find that, you know, I read it and I go, I don't get it, but I love it. You know, it's wonderful. And it's like poetry in that way, that images and some sense of truth comes through, but you can't kind of put your logical mind to it. You can't quite get it in terms of your logical mind. So I want to read that so that we get the flow, and then I'll try to go back and talk a little bit. I don't know how much we'll be able to go through, but with some of it. So this translation that I'm reading is from Kaz Tanahashi. As all things are Buddha Dharma, there is delusion and realization, practice and birth and death, and there are Buddhas and sentient beings. As the myriad things are without an abiding self, there is no delusion, no realization, no Buddha, no sentient beings, no birth and death. Sorry, I have to interrupt and say, he always does this to us. He says one thing and then he says the opposite. And this is kind of the way Dogen does it often. The Buddha way is basically leaping clear of the many and the one. Thus, there are birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings, and Buddhas. Yet in attachment, blossoms fall, and in aversion, weeds spread. To carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. Further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization, who are in delusion throughout delusion. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas, and they go on actualizing Buddhas. When you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you grasp things directly, unlike things and their reflections in the mirror, and unlike the moon and its reflection in the water. When one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the body and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. When you first seek Dharma, you imagine you are far away from its environs, but Dharma is already correctly transmitted. You are immediately your original self. So in that first paragraph, he says that all things are Buddha Dharma. There is delusion and realization, practice and birth and death, and there are Buddhas and sentient beings. And at this point, he's speaking about our phenomenal experience. I mean, just the way we experience the world. I know, you know, all of us, we experience it as differentiated, as there being these objects and things and self and other and all of that. So he's speaking from that point of view, from the relative point of view. Then he switches in the next sentence to speaking from the absolute, or from that mind that is Buddha mind, that is emptiness, and everything is one. And he switches and he says, as the myriad things are without an abiding self, there is no delusion, no realization, no Buddha, no sentient being, no birth, and no death. So he switches between the two very regularly. The next sentence, the Buddha way is basically leaping clear of the many and the one. Thus there are birth and death, delusion and realization, sentient beings and Buddhas. So he's, you know, he talks about the many, then he talks about the one, then he says, just leap clear of it all. And it's all there. It's all there in this differentiated world. It's all one thing. So when he talks about leaping clear, he is talking about not getting caught by either one, and yet including both. So having a mind that includes both an awareness of the absolute and an awareness of the phenomenal, because we live in the phenomenal. I think no matter how hard we try, we live in the phenomenal. And this, you know, I think this is one of the most beautiful sentences in Dogen. I've always loved this. Yet an attachment, blossoms fall, and an aversion, weeds spread. And he's really just talking about, you know, not wanting things that we don't like, and wanting to hold on to things that we do like. But he says it in such a beautiful way. It's such a beautiful image of the flowers falling, that no matter how hard we hold on to them, flowers are still going to fall. We're still going to lose things, you know. And even though we may be aware of that absolute level of things, there's loss, and still there is not things that we do not want, that we have to that we have in our life. So Dogen, one of Dogen's main things that he talks about or teaches about is that enlightenment or awakening happens right in ordinary life, and practice happens right in ordinary life. That's one of the things that he really emphasizes in his teachings. So this way that he returns to kind of the beauty of this world that's phenomenal, but emphasizes that kind of complete embracing of it in some way. The next paragraph, to carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. So basically, this is the first sentence is just what we do. We carry ourselves. We look at everything from the point of view of ourself, and everything is relative to ourself. And this is the way we see the world. And I think I hope I'm not alone in that. But the next sentence, this myriad things come forth and experience themselves, is what Dogen emphasizes as a continuous kind of flow of experience that really, you know, we spend so much time in our mental life deciding how things relate to us that we actually miss what's happening, the direct experience. And so Dogen really emphasizes this idea of the direct experience. He talks about something called undivided activity, which is just a complete immersion in whatever experience is happening for you. So those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who are greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. For Dogen, enlightenment is not a specific state. It's not something that you're going to reach eventually and you'll be in that state and all of a sudden everything will be wonderful and you won't have loss and you won't have suffering and you won't have greed or any of those things anymore. For Dogen, enlightenment is simply a realization of both states of the delusion of our own minds, the delusion that we live with on a daily basis, and the kind of absolute level that there is some truth other than that, and integrating both of those into his life. And he emphasizes that over and over again. Further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization. Oh, did I skip something? Sorry. Those who great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Those who greatly deluded about realization are sentient beings. Okay, so this next sentence further, there are those who continue realizing beyond realization. And, this simply means that it's not something that happens once. It's not something that you understand once. It's something that you practice over and over and over again, that you keep paying attention to delusion. You keep paying attention to practice. I keep feeling like I'm skipping something here, but hopefully we'll go on. When Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice that they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas who go on actualizing Buddhas. And, for Buddhas to not truly know they're Buddhas, for any of us, if we're Buddhas, when we're completely immersed in our experience, we don't have that kind of commenting, editing mind. We're completely immersed. And so at that point, for Dogen, that's your Buddha if you're completely immersed. And as soon as you separate, you're not Buddha. So there's no way to know you're Buddha. And for Dogen, everyone is Buddha originally. And it's a matter of simply discovering that or actualizing that. And that's something that he talks about a lot, about actualizing your practice and actualizing your Buddha nature. When you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you grasp things directly. And here he's talking about that. Unlike things and their reflections in the mirror, and unlike the moon and its reflection in water, when one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. So when he talks about things and their reflection in the mirror or the moon and its reflection in water, that's us seeing everything through the reflection of how it relates to ourselves. That's us seeing, instead of directly experiencing, that's us sieving it through our views. But, Dogen's saying that if you're completely involved in it, only one side is going to be illuminated. Only that thing that you're completely involved in, that will be the whole world. That is the entire world at that moment. And there's no referencing it. Basically the way, at least for myself, so much of my experience is the story that I tell myself about the experience, not the experience. And, Dogen's talking about something else, not doing that, about that, the experience that happens, not the story that you tell about the experience, but that direct, complete experience. And one of the things that I love about this, and there's another place where he talks about this in another way as well, is that I think I always had this idea when I first started practicing that if you actually got some kind of realization that you'd understand everything, that nothing would be hidden. And Dogen says, no, if you really understand, everything's hidden except what you're doing, just what you're doing. That's it. And there's another saying, they say, You know, for a Buddha, you can live on the head of a pin and the whole world is there. And I mean, that's basically what Dogen's saying, is the whole world is in this experience, just this. The whole world is there. Let me see, where were we? When you just study the Buddha way, this is a very famous part of Dogen's. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to reactualize by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Oh, it's such a beautiful paragraph, I think. And basically, that's what we were just talking about. You know, it's completely dropping away that sense of self and completely involving yourself. And again, he talks about actualizing your Dharma place. He talks about sometimes of just simply being in this place that you're at and just actualizing in that way. Okay. This last section that I'm going to look at here is just the last section of this is when you first seek Dharma, you imagine you are far away from its environs, but Dharma is already correctly transmitted. You are immediately your original self. So one of the themes that he has in this whole Genjo koan is that although we originally have Buddha nature, that we actualize it by practice, that we actualize it by this dropping body and mind, by completely immersing body and mind in what is in front of us. And that's how we actualize it. And he also, this, for Dogen, practice and enlightenment are one thing. They're not a separate thing. You're not practicing to become enlightened. Practice is enlightenment. Sitting down and sitting zazen is enlightenment. Completely immersing yourself is enlightenment. This kind of sense of undivided activity. But this was the answer to his question. And Dogen, sat in tremendous amount of zazen, was very rigorous in his practice for his entire life. I wanted to read one other, actually, I've got two other things I wanted to read, but one of the things that I love is this, it's from the segment of the Shobogenzo called Zenki, which means undivided activity. And it's talking about birth, but it could be talking about anything, about our experience or about our life. And I think actually when he uses birth, he's really talking about this life is what he means. Birth is like riding in a boat. You raise the sails and row the oars. Although you row, the boat gives you a ride. And without the boat, no one could ride. But you ride in the boat, and your riding makes the boat what it is. When you ride in a boat, your body and mind and the environs together are the undivided activity of the boat. The entire earth and the entire sky are both the undivided activity of the boat. So this, beautiful way of, telling us that basically we make our world and that our world is activated by us and our world activates us. It makes ourself in some way. And that they're not separate, that they're intertwined in a way that's almost invisible to us. So I'd like to finish, I think I'm going a little bit long, but I'd like to finish with something. I won't say anything about this. It's just a piece that I really love. And I don't know where this translation came from. The other translations that I find often I'm not as happy with. This is one, someone did some calligraphy of it for me years ago. And so it's the one I know and I really love it. This is from One Bright Pearl, part of One Bright Pearl, from the Shobogenzo. Therefore, the reality and beginninglessness of the bright pearl are beyond grasp. All the universe is one bright pearl. We do not speak of two pearls or three pearls. Your whole body is one right Dharma eye. Your whole body is the real body. Your whole body is one expression. Your whole body is a radiant light. Your whole body is mind in its totality. When it is your whole body knows no hindrance. Everywhere is round, round, turning over and over. Since the pearl's merit is thus manifested, there is here and now, Kannon and Morocco, seeing forms and hearing sounds. There are old Buddhas and new Buddhas bodily manifested, preaching the Dharma. So I hope that I gave you some appreciation of Dogen. And he's really, he's so vast in what he writes about. And there's so many different aspects in anything that he says, there are so many different aspects and ways to look at it that he's quite beautiful, I think. But I'm just hoping that I gave you some appreciation of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. So we have a little bit of time for discussion. That was a wonderful kind of stylistic foray into Dogen's thought. That's amazing. It's wonderful. I just wanted to ask one quick question about the last one you just read, One Bright Pearl. When he says, there is here and now Kannon. Is Kannon? Is that Guan Yin?
Kannon is Kuan Yin.
Okay.
Morocco is the Buddha of the future.
Morocco is the Buddha of the future?
Yes. He's often called Maitreya.
Oh, Maitreya, right. And Kannon is Japanese for Guan Yin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bodhisattva of compassion.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Just unmute yourself or comment. Doesn't have to be a question, just a comment. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Deborah. It was a great pleasure to hear words from Dogen and from Suzuki Roshi's practice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It really, I really liked the distinction that you made, that we really are able to hear his words, not going through multiple filters of translations and different minds' interpretations. It's very, very wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, I agree.
There still is great variation in different translations, though, of him. If you read different translations, there's great differences in them.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated your presentation and the way that you brought in these teachings. They all fit together so well. And I appreciated that you tied these together in your talk. And there's some, as you said, some of these are the really famous ones that we've heard, and they're all so beautiful. So I really appreciate what you did. It's very, very good.
Well, I encourage you to read. I mean, you guys probably have, but many of you haven't, the rest of the Genjo Koan, because that's not even half of the Genjo Koan. And I think just even one paragraph of the Genjo Koan is beautiful.
Yeah, as a sociologist, I also love the history. You set a great kind of context for understanding Dogen. And of course, you can see, when you mentioned Suzuki Roshi, you can see how influenced the whole Soto tradition is by him.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Right, and the fact that those of us who never got to listen to Suzuki Roshi miss the kind of the quality of his expression in English.
Mm-hmm.
And
we're videos though.
The video, yeah, which we're going to see Tuesday night.
Tiny.
Yeah, I never met Suzuki Roshi, but I also think just his presence, and I think that's true of most teachers, their presence is as much as the words they say.
Yeah. I wanted to ask another question about the one bright pearl. And I know this is, I believe it's Chinese, but you see depictions of it like in carpets. I have a carpet here, it's got dragons on it. It's a Chinese carpet, but it's got dragons on it. And the dragon is chasing the flaming pearl. Mm. And I wonder if that image relates at all to this idea of this pearl, because it seems that the pearl here is a metaphor or a symbol really for this kind of true nature that has no beginning and is not graspable. And so it seems like the pearl then is this image. And I wonder if that's at all connected. So it's really two questions. What's the connection with the pearl really? And is it connected with the idea of the dragon chasing the flaming pearl that you see in Chinese depictions? Or do you know?
You know, well, I do know that that's only a very small part of the fascicle of the One Bright Pearl. And it starts out talking about a story that I believe is a Chinese story about a pearl, very famous story. So I have not studied that whole fascicle. And so I really can't tell you exactly what it is, but I do know that actually a major portion of that chapter is about that story and kind of an interaction with that story. So I think that I think there is a story and it's very much a symbol within Chinese culture, which has been passed on into Japanese culture. I don't know if Mark Bloodgood might know more about it. Do you know anything more about it, Mark?
One bright pearl.
You gotta cut the finger off.
I think we got it. Thank you.
He would have said Dogen's dead and walked out. So I can't do that.
All right. Any other comments, reflections, questions? Anybody?
Deborah, I just wanted to say that I thought that was a wonderful presentation, and that you presented his life, all that context, and then also a lot of his thoughts in just such a clear, lucid way in such a short amount of time. I'm very impressed. So thank you.
Okay. Well, I actually, after giving the talk, and I thought this in the beginning, I probably should have done one little paragraph of the Genjo koan, because, and that's what people usually do, they don't use it because each one has got too much in it. So,
well, I think
you did well.
Thank you.
I think you did a great job. This is not. This is a different presentation of koans that we've had when Mark was giving his talk on koans, and so this is a different, approach to them, which I appreciate it very much, as I did Mark's as well.
Well, even though it's called a koan, it's not at all, what, like you say, it's very different than a traditional koan, and how it's used as well is very different. But the story at the end is very much like a koan, the story at the end. But, all that exposition about ideas it would not be part of normal koan's study, I don't think. Mm-hmm. Is that right, Mark? Yes. He's nodding yes.
So then the one about the fan, is that one that a teacher would give a student to mm-hmm. say that, and the student would have to respond in some way to that?
Yes, I think so, although I don't know if it's how much it's traditionally used, and I don't know that it's in another, but it's certainly one. The first place I heard it was not from Dogen. It's certainly one that you hear about, the nature of the wind, and I mean, it's really basically the same thing as Dogen, that this Buddha nature reaches everywhere. And it's just an imagery for that in some way.
It is in one of the collections, and I can't remember which collection it's in, but it's a pretty well-known koan.
Yeah.
At the risk of being vulnerable,
Please.
yeah. So I'm going to just say, you know, it's interesting because hearing about what drove him or inspired him to keep studying and to keep searching was the unsatisfactory nature of the answers that he was getting. So, you know, so here's this idea of unsatisfactoriness, right? Which is what suffering is.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it is what inspired him to keep going and then eventually come to something that he found really spoke to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, you know, what was going through my mind is, when does one know that it's unskillful to continue to search after something that is unsatisfactory, or to look for something else? And when does one know that there is more to be learned, or more, you know, more there? So that's kind of the question that I'm coming up with in my mind. So maybe that's a koan.
I'm not a Zen teacher, so I'm not, but you know, I think a Zen teacher might say, yes, you know, that's your answer. And you know, it's interesting. I'm taking a seminar with Norman Fisher right now, and he was talking about the concept of faith in the Lotus Sutra. And he was saying that there's all these different words for faith in the, I guess it was a Sanskrit. I'm not sure what it was written in originally, but anyway, all these different terms for faith. But, you know, they're not the same concept of faith that we have. You know, that their faith, he said in this version of when they're using faith in the context, in this context of Buddhism, that the opposite of it would not be doubt. So doubt's fine, you know. The opposite of it is ill will. And I know, you know, in Zen they say there are three factors that are essential to practice, and one is great faith, great doubt, and great perseverance. So I don't know. That's my answer. You know, because I have lots of doubts, and I'm always looking, and I'm often unsatisfied. But I think that you know, for me, I shouldn't say you, I should say me. For me, practice is right where I am, and so I use what is here, but I'm still looking for other things. Does that make sense? I don't know what else. I mean, that's what I've come to, and I'm just trying to be comfortable with that, because I have great doubt, but I also have great faith. So, you know, and I don't know if that answers your question or not. I just, you know, I mean, I don't know if there is an answer. I think you have to answer it yourself probably, but.
Right. I don't know if there is an answer. I was just posing the question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the Buddha famously said, don't believe me just because of your respect for me as a teacher, but come and see for yourself. So yeah. I think that's why doubt can be, I think doubt, if it I would say for myself, if it causes me to become hopeless, you know, and just lose my interest or momentum, or, you know, or self-doubt, for example, that could be unskillful. But if it causes us to persevere, then it could be skillful.
And I think, I don't know if Susan's actually completely talking about doubt, but you know, I know we've talked in other times, Tuesday night stuff, about people going from one teacher to another, just jumping from one teacher to another. But you know, that I think even if you find the teacher that you really love and really are totally, you should still be looking for other teachings. You know, there should be teachings everywhere. I think so. I don't know if you're talking about doubt or you're talking about teaching, and that's teachers or teachings or that sort of thing. But
okay, to be determined.
Yeah, we could talk about this a long time, huh?
Right. Right. Okay, well, thank you once again, Deborah. This has really been a very wonderful talk, and thanks to everybody else. It's been a great discussion too, and we really are so grateful for your teaching, Deborah, and you are a teacher.
We all are.
Is Corey still there?
He's here.
I wanted to ask him a question about his
I'm
name.
here.
Ryujin.
I'm here.
Is that the same name that, did you get your name from Ryujin?
No, the Dogen's teacher was Ru Jing.
Ryujin, okay.
Yeah, and Ryujin is actually the person who gave me the name is in the room, unless he left. And it's sort of an amalgamation of a former teacher of mine, and then two kanji, two Chinese characters. The first is Ryu, and that means dragon, and the second is Jin, the kanji Jin, which means compassion or benevolence. Yeah.
I also wanted to tell you that that mantra you gave me, I still say it all the time.
Yeah, the Shosai Myo Kichijo Dorani. Yeah, it's a good one. And so nice to see you today at Trader Joe's.
So, well, I think I'll keep this open a couple minutes. I'm going to go outside and bring my cat in, but I'm going to keep this room open for a little bit, and I should be back in a couple minutes. But say good night to everybody as you wish.
And David, doing good. David, is he there? David Crampton?
I think he already left.
Yeah.
Hi, Clay. There's too many people to say hi to.
No, you have to say hi to all of them.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.
Good to see you all.
See you later.
Bye.